I got to tell you, I'm not much into networking, and I don't know why. I've just never really enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong, I love meeting people. I love having one-on-one conversations, even conversations in small groups. It's my jam. I just love like being real with people and having fun and making people smile. Recently, probably several months ago, joined another networking thing thinking, oh, well, maybe this would be something different to try. It was suggested to me by a colleague that I've known and worked with for a long time. Anyway, long story short, I've met some really cool people through this. Has it got me any business? No. And this again is one of those things because of the nature of how I work. Networking just isn't really a match for making that happen. Anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. That's a whole different thing altogether. Maybe I could do a whole season on networking and referral business and how to work your pipeline. That would probably be a good season to do. But I already have next season already planned out and I'm so excited about it. Anyway, let me focus on these next two episodes are an interview with Andrew Hartman. So I talk about this networking thing because I met Kelly Hartman, Andrew's wife, and instantly was taken with her energy, her personality. She was absolutely delightful. Their company is called Time Boss, and they're doing great work. And I love the story that's associated with how they got started and how Andrew came up with this formula of his time management, and they're having incredible success. They went full time together in January, and I'm super proud of what they've accomplished and how they accomplished it. In this first episode, I want to understand what was going on with Andrew in his professional life that made him realize he needed a solution. And so we talk about that whole thing. And the reason why I broke this into two is because what he does through his Time Boss framework is really powerful. And I will have a link to the masterclass that he has on YouTube for free that you will absolutely love and will make a difference in your life. And I recommend if you're in a situation where you can work with Andrew, you can get more involved in what he's doing. The second part, the next episode after this one, I talk specifically about his Time Boss formula and basically the concepts around time management that he solved for. But both conversations are really good. The first one really speaks to what they were facing, what they were dealing with, and how they approached it as business owners, as new solopreneurs, he and his wife. And it's just a delightful conversation. So I hope you enjoy the first part of our conversation in this episode. Welcome to My Solopreneur Life. I'm Terry Pappy, your gracious host, and I am so glad you're here. I have a wonderful episode for you. Sit back, relax, and let's have some real talk about what it is to be a solopreneur. Hey, Andrew, it's so great to have you here on My Solopreneur Life. And this is a wonderful bookend to the season on the hidden realities of being a solopreneur. And I was so looking forward to having you and having this conversation because of what you went through in your own business. So welcome to the show.
Awesome, Terry. Thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this.
Okay, well, we'll see where we go. So don't get too excited about it. You
There
never
you go.
know, right? You never know.
That's true.
And
That's
my
true.
regular listeners are they're doing the eye roll right now, I'm sure. So you are the founder and the head coach, if you will, of Time Boss today.
Correct.
However, you weren't always in that role. And what I'd like to spend this first segment with you on is I really want to understand the journey as initially a solopreneur and to where you are today, if we can kind of capture that. But I love the early decision stages of a solopreneur. What makes them either leave or start their own business, or what really happens? What are the impetus of this? And then after we kind of talk about that, because I really want to hear more about your story, I definitely want to get into the Time Boss methodology and how all that came about and how that can really, really help a solopreneur as they struggle with stress and trying to be more efficient wearing so many hats. So how's that sound?
Yeah, love it. Sounds like a great path.
All right, let's do it. So let's begin in the beginning. You were essentially a software developer for startups and doing a lot of, hands-on in the trenches, working on high deadlines, a lot of pressure. So walk me through the situation you were facing back then that kind of was like the roots of all of this thinking that you are out there selling and helping others with today through Time Boss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I was in early stage venture backed software. Like you said, Terry, it was short runways, high expectations. Everybody was overwhelmed. And what I've learned is pretty much everyone's overwhelmed everywhere. So it wasn't just in software development, but I could just see everyone was overwhelmed, and it was a issue. It was a problem. I was burning out. I was watching people burn out. I was seeing it impact families and relationships and health. I was seeing it impact my results and other people's results. People on my team would burn out, and I would lose their output. I would lose their impact. And I was the kind of person where I didn't want them to burn out. So there was I was aware like this is an issue, but I also didn't know really how to solve it. So the roots of it were an awareness of the problem and a desire for it to be different without totally knowing how can this be different. Everywhere I look, this is simply the way that people are operating. So that was really the roots of what we're doing today. And then, I can share more later, how I came to this Time Boss methodology. But ultimately, it was about solving a problem that I noticed and taking steps towards, okay, how do we solve that problem? What are even the opportunities available where we might solve that problem? Kelly and I, my wife and I, always wanted to go into business together. That was our desire from early on. We worked together at a job right when we got married. We worked at the same company and we loved it. We loved commuting together. We loved talking about business. We would have a deadline at dinner where we would have to stop talking about business because we just loved doing it together. And so we were always looking for opportunities and we just never found that thing that we could be fully committed to until Time Boss. And obviously I could share more about that, but that's really the origin of how we headed in this direction.
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank you for bringing Kelly into the conversation because
Yes.
that's, as I said, in the intro, that's how you and I met was through your charming wife. But I got to tell you, and I fully know that you get this, but you are so lucky to be in a
Mm,
relationship like that where you can both be co-creators because for a lot of solopreneurs who do choose a partnership with a spouse, there can be added tension because the entire life encompasses everything they're doing. They're working together, they're living together, they're building a future together, they're raising
right.
family together, and so on. So it becomes this, kind of loss of identity, perhaps, for many of these couples that are doing this. And it's an added challenge for you both to maintain your identities, I'm sure. And that's another podcast right there, by the way. We could probably do. We'll get Kelly on, the three of us will have a talk about it. But
Yeah.
what's amazing is I can just hear in your voice the excitement and enjoyment and satisfaction and intrigue and acknowledgement that I know I get a lot from that, right? That
Mm,
you give to each other and take from each other as a
yeah.
result of working together. So this is obviously going to be something that has some legs and is likely why you guys are so successful. So speaking of Kelly, if you can remember a point in the past when you were kind of having that realization that there is a problem and here all the symptoms are all around me. I'm experiencing those symptoms as well with the stress and everything. And what was that pivotal moment that you remember where you were like, I have to solve for this? What was going on? Where were you in this job that you had as COO or
Yeah.
whatever you were doing? So walk
Right.
me through that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a long origin story that's everywhere online if anyone's interested. But the tail end of it was I was the COO of a early stage startup. In a 2-year period, we had gone from 0 to 2 million, which is really hard to do from zero, from starting from nothing. It was a grind. It was an incredible team, great people. I love working with them, but it was absolutely taking its toll on me. I kept telling myself, just got to get past this project. I just got to get past this project, and a lot of us will say things like that, just got to get past the season and then it will be different. And it's never different because we continually show up in that place if we don't change our habits. So we had a large project. They were trying to get out the door. We shipped it on a Monday, thought I could finally rest. I was so racked with stress. And on Thursday, the client came back with a large change order that we were working with, and my brain just snapped, like fully burnt out, said, "We are done." Sent an email to my boss, and I said, "I cannot do this anymore." Kind of put everything at risk, put my family at risk. I was the sole provider at that time, put our team at risk, put our investors at risk, put our clients at risk as a function of my stress of, the choices I had made to put this heavy burden on myself. And so really, Terry, the first solve was not for the world. I wasn't thinking I'm going to launch this incredible solopreneur business and we're going to make so much money and help so many people. It was, I have got to solve my own problem. I have got to figure out a way. The questions that I asked myself following that season were, how do I get the results that I want? How do I contribute at the level that I want to the things that are really important to me? And how do I do it from a place of peace, freedom, and clarity, not stress, fear, and anxiety? Those were the questions that I asked. And really, again, I just was trying to solve my own problem. And I can share more about what I did to solve it and how we got there. But Time Boss was born out of first solving my own problem, not because I wanted to start a business, but really because I just wanted to stop feeling the way I was feeling. And along the way, as I solved it really well for myself, I realized this will help so many other people, as evidenced by people that would just start asking me to help them with their own problems of overwhelm. And in a lot of ways, Kelly and I always joke, we kind of just rode the horse in the direction it was going. We didn't have this incredible vision of let's go change the world with Time Boss and this way of thinking about time. People just kept asking us to help them because they saw that I had solved the problem and they wanted to solve that problem too. And so that's really what's brought us to where we are today is just riding the horse in that direction it's going.
I like that saying. I may have to use that again.
It's
It's a
not
new one
mine.
for me.
I didn't invent it, but I do love it. I do
That's a
love it a
good one.
lot.
Well, it does the job for sure. And as I
Yeah.
was listening, and I want to peel that onion just a little bit more. Um, but as I was listening and you were like, I just wanted to solve my own problem. And it brought me back to conversations I was just having yesterday with some solopreneurs that were struggling in their consulting business. There was two in particular that I'm remembering right now. And the way they talked about what they did, the way they were presenting, how to get out of the problem they were having, they were unable to identify the problem that they solved for. And
Hmm.
I see that in my business being in communications that many solopreneurs have not taken the time to identify a problem, whether it's theirs or whether it's like in your situation, it was your problem that fortunately you realized that you weren't the only one having that problem. And that's a
Right.
brilliant aha moment for any solopreneur who can self-solve, create whatever around that is the solution, and then realize this is something that I can bring to others. And that's truly being of service when you're able to do that. But
Right.
I was remarkably astonished at how they just stepped right over it. And whether that was, they were looking for another job and they were consulting in the interim or whatever it was. And the way they talked about things was always in retrospect to their resume. Like, oh,
Hmm.
I did this in healthcare, or oh, I did that in software development, or oh, I did this in sales. And they just wanted to kind of keep perpetuating that story about where they've been. So let's just keep talk about the horse, going in the direction the horse was already going. That's how they function, but they don't make the connection of the problem they solve. If you want to be
Right.
out there selling a service or product and you want to convey that you're the right person, you don't give them your resume. You say, tell me about your problem. And then you
Right.
help them discover that they're misdiagnosing. And then you come in and say, have you thought about it this way? And
Right.
they can only get there, Andrew, if they really understand the problem that they've solved for. And I
Yeah.
think that
Well said.
that is so unique for many business owners that they have taken the time to build a straw man, to go through their own litmus test, to identify, like, here are the nuances, and this is how I look at it. And that's what I want to peel the onion a little bit more
Sure.
about is like when you were identifying those things, obviously you were having symptoms and you had to think about it. You had to spend time exploring, self examining. Walk me through what were some of the things. Let's get a little closer into the details of those experiences, those thoughts, those conversations with Kelly, where you were really trying to solve for this. And the early stages being you have to clearly identify it. So walk me
Yeah.
through that.
Yeah. So, my diagnosis was the way I was operating is not sustainable. And so if I care about my contribution, if I care about my family, if I care about my health, something's got to change. That was really the diagnosis of, I mean, truly, I didn't know what to do, Terry. I looked around and I just didn't see anyone else solving this really well. I just felt like I was more ambitious than people around me. And so I was burning out just because I was pushing too hard. But no one I knew seemed to have a recipe to get the results that they wanted from an experience of life that they actually wanted. So I was a product person. I worked in early stage software. I knew how to build product. And so I just made myself the customer. And I said, these are the problems I'm trying to solve, or the outcomes I'm trying to drive. The outcomes I want are I have to get results that I want, contribute at a level that I want, with an experience of life that I want. And so I went to work to solve that problem. I read every book you can possibly imagine on time management. And I was looking for what are the components of this particular system, this particular book, that address the boundary conditions that I've just described, those two conditions. And then I just started iterating, hundreds of iterations. I would run this weekly process and I would essentially run experiments. I was an early stage startup person, so all we do is run experiments. I would run experiments for a week, get to the end of the week and say, did I get the results that I want with an experience of life that I wanted? And I just would solve for the roadblocks that were preventing that. And so it really was a tunneling exercise. I didn't know if I was close to that. I didn't know if I would figure it out next week or next year, but the pain was so bad that drove me to that moment. I knew I could never go back to burnout. I knew I was not going to miss my kids growing up. I was not going to lose my marriage because of this. I was not going to go back to losing literally a sense, my sense of smell as a function of stress. I was not going back there. And so those were really the exercises that drove me forward. And it took about 5 years. I mean, I don't want to gloss over the fact that it was a lot of work. I was very motivated to solve this problem, but we did it. And Time Boss is the distillation of 5 years of pain that helps people in a simple, repeatable way get the results that they want from their time with an experience of life that they actually want.
Mm, very elegantly put. I think you've said that before.
Ah,
But
yes,
when you really get the problem you solve, it just naturally floats to the surface, doesn't it?
yes,
It's
yeah,
one of those things where like, okay, this is like you say, the distillation of this work. And I was as I was listening, you're gonna laugh. I was thinking, oh, there's another business model in there because the process you went through as a software developer, right? The process you went through to get to that solution, or at least to discover and diagnose and try different things, have those experiments. Why doesn't every business function that way? Why doesn't every business, have that
yeah,
situation? Why do they have to get a balanced scorecard? Why do they have to do this? Why do they have to hire Ernst and Young and have 30, 20 something consultants recently out of grad school come in and sit and take notes, right? And pay
yeah,
$1 million to have consultants come in and show you, okay, this is what you need to do. I mean,
yeah.
that's I'm telling you, that's another business for you there. So,
Well, what's interesting in that too, I totally agree. And I really, I'll talk to a lot of my friends are leaving corporate work and they're going solopreneurs and they bring balanced scorecard and EOS and all these really like heavy things. And I say at the end of the day, you are solving a problem. Go find the person that has a spear in their chest where you can remove that spear and you will be gainfully employed and hired for the rest of your life. And it's really that simple. I always say we are looking for products that are the simplest solution to the problem. The analogy I always use is a spoon for cereal. We have effectively hired spoons to bring cereal from the bowl to our mouth. It is the simplest way to do that. There are much more complicated ways to do that. We could have a balanced scorecard about what are the right ways for us to get the spoon and get the cereal all the things. But at the end of the day, like we use spoons because it's easy. And to me, that's what we have to be thinking. As you start a new business, what is the simplest solution to the problem? for a variety of reasons. One, people love simple solutions, they'll actually hire them. Two, people are so distracted. There are so many things competing for their attention. And if we bring complexity, our prospect's brain is really doing calorie preservation. They're trying to work as little as possible to solve their problem. We have to press through complexity back to simplicity to provide simple solutions that help solve people's problems, at least to start. It can become complex later, but at least to start, it's got to be simple. And so that's why I ran the process I did for myself. I knew if it wasn't simple, I wasn't going to use it. And so Time Boss benefits from me solving my own problem, and now it solves a lot of people's problems.
Well, when you reach cruising altitude, okay, with Time Boss, you can go and take this new venture and create something as elegant, right? And just give me a little credit at some point. Say,
Absolutely,
this
Terry.
all came from a podcast that I did with Terry Pappy back in.
I'm going to call it the Pappy method. That's what we'll
There
call
you
it.
go. There you go. All right. And I'll take care of all the communications around it. Speaking of
Perfect.
which, as we wrap up this first part, I wanted to ask you, and I could have made like a 5-parter out of our conversation. Believe me, there's so many good things in here. Okay, so you figured it out. You've got your solution to the problem in the early stages. When did it become a business? And how did you and Kelly, from the standpoint of getting the decision together about this is a business? And what did that look like in those early days? Because there's a lot of my listeners are kind of at that point where they're ready to pull the trigger, or they've just been experienced a riff and they're trying to decide, do I go solo or do I look for another JOB or whatever? So what were some of those early stages? Because as we talk about the hidden realities of being a solopreneur, I'm sure you guys had some bumps in the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I solved it for myself. I forced my team to operate this way. I essentially told them, you're not going to mess this up. Like, I am protecting myself from burnout. I'm getting great results with an experience of life that I actually want. You have to run this way. And I had the authority to make them do that. Well, lo and behold, Terry, they started having incredible results with an experience of life they wanted. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I would move on to other companies. I would install it there. It would work. They would move on to other companies and they would ask me to come install it for them at those other companies, and they would pay me to do it. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. Like, people are willing to do actual value exchange with me for, these mental models. They were very unpackaged at that time. People started asking me to coach them one-on-one. And so again, in that idea of riding the horse in the direction it was going, people were asking me, they were drawing me into to provide that value. And I think often for new businesses, it's a great signal. Pay attention to what people ask you to do. Where are you the shortest distance to solving their problem? That's often a great signal of a way for you to head in terms of your business. I was doing a little bit of one-on-one coaching, and I was kind of doing it as a favor to a bunch of buddies, and they weren't getting great results. They do it for a week or two, and then they would quit because they weren't really in a committed relationship with me. It was kind of like we would go to coffee and we would talk about Time Boss. And I had a buddy, Ange Bourgeois, another solopreneur. He was running, this is so fascinating, Terry. You should talk to Ange. Ange is running a coaching business for 8 to 12-year-old catchers who want to be high school catchers. And he runs a very successful business targeting that very specific segment. So that's a whole separate story.
Wow, that is very niche, the most niche I've ever heard. So,
and he's incredible at it. Look up Coach Bougie on TikTok. He's incredible. So he happened to live in my neighborhood. He happened to see me every Sunday morning planning out my week using the Time Boss method and happened to ask me about it, changed his life. And he said, you've got to do something with this. He's like, this is incredible. He's like, what are your problems? And I'm like, well, I'll show people and they'll give up after 2 weeks. And he said, well, start a 4-week coaching group online, get them in a room with you, help them get reps and work past the friction of change, and then it'll stick for them. It was a Sunday morning. He really encouraged me on this. By Sunday night, I had posted on LinkedIn, hey, if you hate your calendar, I want to help. I'm opening a coaching group for 5 people. This was back in 2023. And it was, truly, Terry, like, I was afraid to send it. I took a screenshot of it. I sent it to Ange and I said, is this going to work? I don't know. La, 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 la. And then finally I was like, you know what? Send it. What's at risk? Let's see what happens. And so it really just was this kind of step in faith of like, maybe this will work. I don't know. And it was low risk. It was a coaching group on LinkedIn, very low risk, right? Maybe it was going to cost me 10 hours total. It wasn't that big of a risk. Filled up almost instantly. All those people had incredible value. And Kaylee and I had this real moment of, oh, this is really interesting. But that group was free. I said, I just want to figure this out. So I brought in friends and family, essentially, and that group was free. Next group paid, and the next group paid, and the next group paid. And we're on, I don't even know what cohort we're on at this point, maybe number 50. Like, it's we just, like I said, we rode the horse in the direction it's going. And so the way that I structured it, I think this is probably beneficial to your audience, Terry. We did that on the side, like literally nights and weekends. I was running Time Boss cohorts at 6 a.m. on Saturdays with parents before people's kids woke up, like that type of thing. And it just kept expanding. And there was an opportunity that developed in my career where I could go fractional. And Kelly and I looked at it and we said, like, there is something here. Like, it is resonant. It is solving a real problem. People are willing to do value exchange. We kept increasing our prices and people kept saying yes. And so there just were these signals for Kelly and I of like, there's something here. Let's at least explore it. So I went fractional. 3/4 of my time was, I became a fractional COO. So still generally doing the same things in software and business, you know, as an operator, but 1/4 of my time started going to Time Boss. And then that expanded and half my time went to Time Boss. And then that expanded and 3/4 of my time went to Time Boss. And as of January this year, we're all in. So Kelly and I are fully focused. All we're doing is Time Boss. And so we really, that transition, not everyone is afforded fractional work. I recognize that. If you have the opportunity, it allowed us to expand into the value and really iterate. So when we were at that quarter time, Terry, we were talking specifically to individuals, and we were marketing and onboarding individuals into group coaching. In order for us to go full-time, now we work primarily with corporates where, you know, one of our current implementation is with 16 leaders at a single company. So one buyer making a decision for 16 people, that gives us the runway and margin and opportunity for us to be full-time on this because we're not having to go sell all those 16 individuals at once. Some of that is based off our experience, our background. I did kind of enterprise account management, sales, customer success for a while. So I understand how to communicate value in that environment. But again, by incrementally working our way into it, it forced us to just solve all kinds of problems, take all kinds of steps. And we were watching it grow. And I'll say, I mean, just transparently for you and your audience, in October, when Kelly and I knew we were going full-time in January, we said, we made the decision. We had communicated to my last fractional COO clients that we were going to be winding down. We were terrified. I mean, like legitimate fear. Like it was a real, like, are we making the right decision? You know, I've got an 18-year-old daughter who's going to college, a 15-year-old son where college is not far behind. We are entering a cash-strapped era of life. Is this the right decision? And what I leaned into was the momentum we had, the clear evidence that we were solving a very hard problem and that problem was everywhere. And so, you know, through a lot of deep breaths, a lot of prayer, a lot of identity work, Kelly and I locked arms and said, we are going to do this together. And one thing that we did that I think is valuable for solopreneurs, we commit in quarters to Time Boss in terms of our focus. And so we're not saying we're doing this forever, burn the ships, la, la, la. We're not saying any of that. We're saying for the next 3 months, we're all in. At the end of 3 months, if we don't have indicators that this is going in the right direction, then we're going to have an honest conversation about that. And maybe we need to rethink about our focus and how much time we're giving to Time Boss. But it gives us this some room to operate, to really see, can we be successful without, you know, having a bad month, our first month in January this year, and pulling the ripcord and saying, this isn't working, let's go back, you know, and letting fear take over. It gave us a little bit of room to operate, and that's really been resourceful for Kelly and I.
Well, I'm glad you acknowledged that. Thank you, because that's such a real thing for solopreneurs at any stage of what we're doing in our business, whether we're just thinking about starting, we've just started in our first year, or we're in our 10th year. I mean, I'm in my 20th year and getting ready to start my 21st year. And there are still moments where I'm like, holy crap, strap in, girl, you know? And oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to talk to you about, but I want to pause right now because I would love to take the time to talk about Time Boss, because this is something that I know is going to be incredibly valuable for my listener. So let's put a pin in it now, and we'll be back in a moment. Well, I know you're disappointed, but that's it for this episode. Listen, the great news is there's another one coming, so stay tuned. Anyway, I just want to make sure that you do the prompt. If this episode had a prompt, and you get that homework done because you're going to be a better solopreneur. How's that for a maternal finger shaking at you? Hey, listen, thanks so much for being here, for giving me time of your day. and, for taking it on. So if you want to learn more and stay connected with me, just head on over to mysolopreneurlife.com. Thanks a bunch. See you soon. That was pretty good. I think I'll keep that one. Bye.